Due to the current state of immigration in the United States, rental properties are becoming available throughout the entirety of the state of Florida. Does that mean there's opportunities for rent prices to lower in the United States, for U.S. citizens to have more affordable housing and more options when they go to rent? While it is true that rents are popping up left and right in Florida, does this really equate lower rent prices? And are U.S. citizens really going to be able to benefit from these opportunities? Currently, food trucks are empty. They just don't have enough customers. By the side of the road, you can see evictions and, of course, for rent signs popping up in all these neighborhoods. Definitely, it is clear that many people are leaving, with mattresses and couches out on every other block and homeless people moving into these neighborhoods. I recently went Uber driving in the ONECO area of Bradenton in the morning, and the sights that I saw were terrifying. Neighborhoods that were busy and packed looked like ghost towns. Evictions left and right, garbage out by the road, homeless people digging through the garbage, and of course the desperation of the times visible on people's faces. Many people in the Hispanic community are taken to addiction, and their sense of hopelessness, not knowing what to do in the current situation. Many people have lost hope. Others have returned voluntarily in hopes that they can re-enter the country legally in the future through some type of means that's legal. But of course, the question is, with all these people leaving Florida because of the immigration ordeal we're going through right now, does that equate to opportunities for U.S. citizens? Will this abundance of rental properties now contribute to lower rent prices for U.S. citizens and make life easier for those who are here legally? Without a doubt, the economical impact of losing so many people in the community is staggering. Food trucks are having to close. Even commercial properties now have for lease signs. Restaurants, stores have all had to close. We've seen the famous scrap metal collectors selling the shelves off of stores for scrap metal recently. We haven't seen that since the last recession, so there's definitely a negative economical impact on these communities. Empty neighborhoods equal empty businesses, and I talked to business owners here in ONECO, and they are hurting. The food truck people tell me that the customers used to hang out outside. They say in the rare case they get a customer, they're taking the food to go. Without a doubt, people who own businesses in this city, people who work for tourism, construction, and landlords are hurting more than ever. But on top of that, I noticed that it doesn't seem like these availabilities of rent are actually going to lower prices in the types of neighborhoods where we live. I'm sure most of us are looking at rental prices in nice suburban areas, not in inner city ghettos. Notice the store shelves being sold for scrap metal. That's from a recent business that closed down, and this is really the scenario all over Bradenton right now. We're seeing for lease signs in all types of commercial districts. Restaurants that recently opened are closing. Food trucks that recently got established are closing down. And well, the situation in these neighborhoods is grim. Of course, most of the rental units are seeing a lot of vacancy. Driving through these neighborhoods, we've noticed a lot of rental properties are empty. Even the main strip here looks like a ghost town. Businesses that many years ago were open today are completely shut down. Without a doubt, the overall appeal of this neighborhood went from bad to absolutely worse. And of course, when you have more vacancy in commercial neighborhoods, it creates more opportunities and places for homeless people to be vagrant, which means that the homeless population has now moved back into ONECO with plenty of rundown businesses and closed down areas to hide. The homeless population seems to be thriving out here. So there's definitely some visible downsides to the current situation, particularly for those people in retail businesses and, of course, landlords having to leave their properties vacant with no tenants for long periods of time. Will they consider renting to Americans? That's the real question. I want you guys to take a look at this code enforcement complaint from Collier County, Florida. This was back in 2011. Now, this property was rented out to an American family, and they instantly came with a bedbug infestation. Then they retaliated on the landlord by moving out and calling the health department and code enforcement, complaining that the property had bed bugs. When they moved out, they left their bedbug infested furniture behind for the homeowner, the property owner, to have to get rid of. There's a lot of liability with property owners renting to U.S. citizens. For one, they feel entitled, and many times, like this person do, they try to retaliate, trying to hurt the landlords, bringing them problems with code enforcement, the health department, and they also turn up the heat on the neighborhoods, constantly calling the police on people, which in turn causes other landlords to bring the attention of their neighbors, saying, hey man, you let these people move in here and they're causing a lot of trouble. I mean, when you drive to these neighborhoods today, you can see mattresses everywhere. You can see couches on the side of the road. You can tell that these neighborhoods are quickly getting empty. But the experiences with most of these slumlords is avoid U.S. citizens. They're entitled, they retaliate, they demand, they snitch, they complain, and all that gets in the way of profit, not only for themselves, but also for adjacent property owners. The reality is that most of these slumlords are not going to be interested in catering to U.S. citizens. Even though you may call the number on the sign, the chances that these landlords are going to want you as a tenant is almost zero. If you're familiar with the slumlord business, you know that people who are in illegality have to pay a premium to live somewhere. People who are undocumented, people who have criminal records are not easily and readily available to obtain rents. So the slumlords can charge these people a premium for allowing their illegalities, maybe their legal status, their criminal record, or running a freaking business out of the front yard. It's a mutual, speechless agreement between landowners, property owners, and their tenants that they're going to do whatever the crap they want on the properties, and they're going to overlook whatever the crap the slumlords got going on. Everybody's trying to get to the money. When you rent to people who think they have rights, think they're going to call the county, call law enforcement, call the health department, complain about their neighbors, endlessly make complaints about repairs on the property, not knowing how to fix simple things, all that leads to the homeowners not wanting to rent to U.S. citizens. For the most part, people who rent these properties know that if a sink fails, they got to fix it themselves. Anything that happens on the property, it's your problem. If the air conditioner's squeaky and noisy, you can buy another one or you can keep the one you have squeaking. This white resident who made this complaint in Collier County in 2011 was one of the few and far between white people that ever ended up in this neighborhood. For the most part, the landlords knew that if they were going to rent to somebody, it had to be an immigrant. The rent was always on time. They never had to go to court for an eviction. If they didn't like the situation, they got up and left and didn't leave any garbage behind. But when it came to U.S. citizens, they were constantly bringing trouble, law enforcement, court enforcement, health department, and let's not forget the good old court-ordered evictions. For the most part, undocumented people try to keep a low profile, which means they're going to avoid having law enforcement show up at all costs. But with U.S. citizens living in poor neighborhoods, it seems like it's a constant clown show, bringing law enforcement, many times discovering code violations on police reports, which end up bringing problems to the landlords. I recently called some of these for rent signs to get prices for what these things are going for recently. Many years ago, these prices were $1,600 to $1,800 a piece. As of right now, some of them are as low as $1,100. However, when you call them and talk to them in English, they don't seem very interested in communicating with you. They tell you the property's not ready yet, or they give you an extraordinarily high price. If you talk to them in Spanish, the prices seem more reasonable and their willingness to show their property increases dramatically. Calling around, getting prices for these rental properties, I figured out quickly that if you talk to them in English and you sound professional, they have no intention of renting these properties to you. If you talk to them in Spanish, there's a little less hesitation. For the most part, landlords know, or slumlords in this case, that their best bet are with undocumented people who will pay a premium for the illegality, and that they should definitely avoid people who can call code enforcement, law enforcement, and bring trouble to them on properties that they have very little interest in devoting time to. As always on my YouTube channel, I tell you guys things for what they are and not giving a crap about how you feel about it. And the reality of these rental properties that are coming on the market now because of ICE and immigration raids, it isn't whether it's going to lower rent prices. Dude, these people are not going to rent to you. There's not a chance in the world that they're going to let entitled American people with rights and cell phones and contacts at the county office. These landlords come around once a month, or they send somebody to get an envelope with cash money. They don't want to hear about your check. They don't want to hear about your credit score and how you can't withdraw the rent money cash. They don't give a crap. There's a mutual understanding between how slumlording works in the United States, how they want to get paid, and the amount of time and effort that they're going to devote to these properties. And most people who are renting low-income properties that are of an American background, who think they have rights and think they're entitled to doing things the proper way, are going to find out that they are not attractive tenants. Now, I've talked to a few landlords as well in this area, and I understand the idea that there's a lot of incentive to renting to people who are undocumented, pay their rent money cash, know how to fix a broken sink, and for anything on earth would never get the health department or anybody else from local government involved in what's going on in these decrepit properties. So just in case you're wondering if these openings are going to affect you into where you'll be able to rent these properties, these landlords ain't going for it. They would rather leave the property vacant waiting for somebody to rent in illegality than they are renting to you with all your expectations, demands, and rights. And whether you like hearing that, that's the truth, and that's what landlords are telling me. And if you don't believe me, call these numbers in Spanish from one number and call them in English from another and compare the difference in how these people are going to treat you. They simply are not going to rent to Americans. It's too much of a liability, it's too much of a hassle, and they know that somebody out there will pay more than you will, complain less, fix their own crap, and basically stay the crap out of the way, having the money in an envelope on the first, and not having to worry about the county showing up for any freaking reason. So if you're wondering if these openings in rental properties in poor neighborhoods could mean that you as a U.S. citizen are going to be able to find a deal on affordable housing, probably not. These are slumlords, and they've been dealing with good tenants for a very long time. They're not ready to deal with you. And then the obvious question is, most of us are not going to move to one of these places. Most of us are going to want to live in a suburban apartment if we're renting. And the real issue here is, why would somebody move to these neighborhoods? Obvious as well as the fact that once these people move out, the people that are going to move into these neighborhoods, I mean, these areas already have a bad reputation, but we've already seen in Florida with places like Pine Manor that when you have large number of evictions for immigration purposes, the people that move in are a lot more problematic. Besides that, these new apartments like this is likely where most of us are looking to rent, and nobody illegal is living in these types of apartments because they have requirements, they check your credit, they check your papers. And in these types of newer apartments, there's no vacancies, which means that if you're renting a decent place, literally there are no new openings. All the openings that are coming about now are in low-income neighborhoods, particularly where undocumented people live. And just because there's an abundance of affordable real estate in poor areas, that doesn't necessarily equate to prices dropping in segments of real estate that are unaffected. For example, if houses that are worth $50 million are now worth $20 million, that's not going to affect what it costs to rent an apartment or to live in a poor neighborhood. The reality is that all these segments of real estate are different. Yeah, perhaps if the rich people stop buying $50 million mansions, that may have absolutely no effect on somebody renting a normal property. See, you have to realize that the real estate market, according to some YouTubers, it's one single blob of information, but that's not realistically how the market works. You could have a crunch at the top where people just are not buying expensive properties. That doesn't necessarily equate to affordable properties changing prices. So for the most part, most people that are living in the suburbs like Lakewood Ranch or other nice suburban communities, for those individuals, prices are not going to change. Just because there's all these opening in trailer parks over there and on roads that aren't paved, that's not going to affect real estate prices. For example, in Lakewood Ranch, where student housing is, in areas that are more desirable, where renting agreements exist within a contract. In fact, while it hasn't happened yet, I believe that places like Lakewood Ranch are actually going to get more expensive because these people that live in these affordable areas are the landscapers, the painters, the maintenance guys, the irrigation guys, the pool cleaning guys. All those people are starting to disappear, which means that now if you live in an area that has high maintenance, like a gated community or a resort type apartment complex with pools and other amenities, chances are your rent prices are going to increase because, well, they simply can't find people to do the same thing for the same prices. So I don't really believe that in the price bracket that most of us are in, these evictions are going to make any difference at all. And even if you made the conscious decision to move to a much more affordable and dangerous neighborhood to save money on rent, there's no guarantee that those landlords are going to want you as a tenant. Now, Florida's economy has two large segments: tourism and construction. Both of these industries are heavily affected by what happens with immigration. And we have started to see some properties hit the rental market in kind of higher end neighborhoods because there is kind of not as much interest in Florida for a tourism perspective. Airbnbs, rentals, beach vacation homes, all of that is seeing a crunch as well. See, it isn't just that people are not coming to Florida because they're undocumented. It isn't just on the worker side, it's also on the tourism side. And when it comes to tourism, Florida is also suffering significantly. Numbers at the Sarasota airport, for example, are down 9% year to year. But keep in mind that most of our international tourists are actually using the Tampa airport. Those people coming to Siesta Key and Anna Maria Island are most likely coming internationally, and those people are going to go to the Tampa airport, not the Sarasota airport. So you have to understand too that different airports cater to different people. When it comes to local airline traffic, year to year, we're down about 9% versus last year. Numbers of passengers at the Tampa airport are down insignificantly to a decline from the previous year. So we're starting to see that just not as many people are coming to Florida, or at least that the numbers are not changing in any positive way. At the Tampa airport, Air Canada, for example, is down 10%. Global airlines are down 34%. But pointless analytics, hotel prices, which we've done a few videos on lately, demonstrate that ain't nobody coming to Florida for tourism right now. Of course, with tourism, hospitality, a lot of the workers, maids, all those people are going to be undocumented. Most are going to be Mexican, Nicaraguan, Venezuelans. All those areas are suffering greatly. But of course, the major question is, does this opening up of all this affordable housing in dangerous, poor neighborhoods where undocumented people are living going to relate to any type of benefit to the average person? I mean, if you want to move to a dangerous neighborhood, sure. But am I going to move to one of these neighborhoods? Probably not. And I believe that most people today, like I Uber drive, and I talk to people who are McDonald's employees, Taco Bell employees that don't have a car and take an Uber. And when I tell them, would you move to these areas to save $1,000 a month on rent? And their answer is a solid no. They would rather get a roommate in a place like Lakewood Ranch versus having a whole place themselves in a dangerous neighborhood. For example, let's say a rent here in Lakewood Ranch costs $2,000 a month. And in Tampa or Sarasota, in a rougher neighborhood, the same exact rent is $1,700 a month, but there's no washer or dryer included. Well, already that's one incentive less not to have that rental option. And the issue with these new apartment complexes are that they include your gym, your pool, your washer, your dryer, your parking, all that is included. And it's a lot more convenient, let's say, for somebody to find a roommate and live in a suburban area like Lakewood Ranch versus having a whole place themselves in a poor neighborhood where perhaps they're going to have to deal with their appliances not working, perhaps long waits to get their appliances repaired. We all know the hassles of slumlording if you're a tenant, so none of that's a surprise. I mean, in Lakewood Ranch, if your washer or dryer were to break, you make a phone call and they come and they fix it right away. So after talking to my Uber passengers, people who are working kind of unfortunately mediocre jobs like McDonald's or Taco Bell, when I talk to them about all these new openings in rental properties in these neighborhoods, they tell me that they would much rather live in Lakewood Ranch with a roommate versus having to live in these neighborhoods with all the variables that exist there. In particular, Even if a rental property is a few $100s cheaper in these areas that's comparable in square footage, they don't include a washer and dryer. And when you include the time and convenience and cost of doing that, it almost equates to you're better off paying $2,000 in Lakewood Ranch and having everything included versus having to live in these poor neighborhoods and not having access to a washer or dryer. Or many of these apartment complexes include your internet access already with your rent, where if you were to rent in these areas, you would have to install your own internet. So when you include the fact that, okay, now you don't have your internet, now you don't have your washer and dryer, when you throw that into the picture, it almost costs the same to live in a nice apartment in Lakewood Ranch as it does to live in the inner city deprived in an apartment that doesn't have any of those amenities included. The cost equates to roughly about the same. And some of the most deplorable properties, they get down to as much as $1,100 a month. But then you have to take time out of your life for internet access. You got to take time out of your life to go do your laundry. And when you calculate all that in, it just doesn't make sense for a lot of people. So a lot of people are opting for is to get a nice apartment in Lakewood Ranch with a roommate versus being stuck in these dangerous neighborhoods where they have to deal with countless different variables from homeless people, car break-ins, gang activity, which is in these areas that we were showing you earlier today, ONECO, lots of gang activity in there. So you got gangs, you got homeless people, you got violence, you have just people on drugs out and about, zombied out like you saw at the start of the video. So it just makes more sense to live in Lakewood Ranch with a roommate. So what I'm hearing from people that are working regular jobs in my community is that they would much rather be here in Lakewood Ranch with a roommate than they are moving into these bad neighborhoods with all these other uncontrollable factors. So for people who are working fast food jobs, like the bottom of the barrel of incomes among U.S. citizens, they would much rather end up here in Lakewood Ranch versus having to live in these neighborhoods. So again, the abundance of affordable housing in those neighborhoods will only create an economical decline for the businesses that operate there, which in turn could affect the cost of living in nicer communities because of lack of workers. So it doesn't exactly equate to a better economical situation for people in suburban America or the average working class American in general. So as an Uber driver, we know that here in the Tampa area, we have a lot of people who are driving Uber undocumented with leased accounts. So you're starting to see less of that, but at the same time, you're also seeing less passengers. It seems to me that when there were more passengers and more undocumented Uber drivers, you made more money. Now, you don't have as many Uber drivers, particularly those using the leased accounts, which is, by the way, absolutely dangerous. These guys don't have a license, don't have insurance, and they're driving around Uber with fake accounts, leased accounts. It's an absolute safety concern for the community that this was happening to begin with. But once again, even when you calculate all that into the picture, yes, I'm not competing with these undocumented drivers, but I'm also not getting 7 or 8 Haitian passengers every single day, not getting any Brazilian passengers, and definitely not getting any international tourists. So it actually works out for the negative. So yes, on one side, there is less competition with the Uber drivers, but on the other side, I'm just not getting any passengers. I mean, I had a day on Tuesday where literally I only made $4 the entire day. Literally, there were no passengers commuting. And that means, like, look at the streets of Sarasota. It's just empty. And yeah, we have our off season and stuff like that, but just talk to business owners. I recently talked to somebody at a food truck, and they told me that they had a Friday night where they closed down and went home early. Usually, he says he's got people lined up till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning outside, and there was nobody there on a Friday night. And if there were people, they were taking it to go. They weren't vibing. So it's definitely a very pessimistic vibe in these neighborhoods. And the availability of rental properties in these neighborhoods probably is going to equate to little to no benefit to me and you. Now, if this trend continues and we start to see even larger numbers of available real estate, then it is possible that maybe 6 months to a year from now, some of these apartment complexes are going to have to start lowering their prices. But even if they lower their prices, you have to keep in mind that no matter how affordable these poor areas get, you still have your washer and dryer included. You're in a safer, better neighborhood. you have more amenities, you have more things included. So even if they were to drop their prices to $900 or $800 a month, these apartments that offer washer and dryer included, easy repairs when things happen, I mean, all that combined means that there'll still be a lot of incentive for people to go with a roommate situation in a nicer apartment versus having a whole place themselves and having to deal with all those variables. So only time will tell. Without a doubt, rent prices are going to come down for the lower half of the market. When it comes to like nicer places, let's say rents over $2,000 a month, at this point, I don't see any changes. In fact, I believe prices could actually increase in this price bracket. Now here we also have a lot of students on student visas, and it is possible that they won't come back next year. So we'll see what happens with the students now. I mean, this is something that next year we're going to see the results. It's possible that we won't get any more students over here. And if that were the case, places like Lakewood Ranch, apartment complexes here could lose 15-20% of their tenants, and that would definitely reduce prices maybe by $150 at most. For the most part, when we have had crunches, like when these changes first came about, what these apartments are doing is that they're not lowering their rent prices. They'll give you a free month or even 2 months. I've seen 6 weeks free, and they give you that versus lowering the rent price. So these apartment complexes don't want to lower the rent prices. They'll give people incentives to move in, like a month or 2 off. So you could have better incentives to move or to renew your lease. I remember a while back, my apartment complex, last time I went to renew my lease, gave me $1,000 bonus to sign again. So they didn't change my rent price. They gave me a bonus for staying. And this is kind of the way they're doing things, because they know that if one apartment complex starts to drop their rent, the rest of them have to do it, and that sets off a chain of events that they don't want to do. So what they're doing now is that they're incentivizing leasing, not lowering rent prices. So take a look at these apartment complexes in Bradenton. You can see on the left there's a house that has 3 for rent signs. It's literally across the street as you enter their community. So of course the price of that adjacent property is going to have some type of bearing on the leasing at these apartments right here. But keep in mind that what these apartments are most likely going to do is that they're going to offer leasing incentives, perhaps 6 weeks off or 2 months rent, but the actual price tag of the rent isn't going to go down. So my experience leasing in Florida has been leasing incentives versus rent price drops. And those incentives can range greatly from the actual price tag to giving you a free garage. Already, leasing incentives have been taking place in Florida for the last year and a half. They can smell that trouble is brewing in the rental market, and they're giving people the incentives. But they're not going to actually lower their rent prices. And if they're going to lower the actual rent price, it's going to be by dividing your incentive over a 12-month period, which means that eventually when you get out of that first term of your lease to sign again, that incentive will go away, which means you'll be paying the price you would have been paying initially. So do not exactly equate these availability of rents, a temporary problem, as a long-term solution to the cost of housing. Now, I've been running inquiries with my Uber passengers on what they would prefer to do. And I'm talking people that work at McDonald's, Taco Bell, like drive-through type people that are obviously just using an Uber because they don't even have a ride. So these are like just really people who need affordability but would like to live in a nice apartment, let's say. And for most of those people, not much is going to incentivize them to move into these neighborhoods. In fact, I've had a few people even repute the idea, telling me that there's no way on earth they're going to go back to living in the hood or to putting themselves in these dangerous situations. They're telling me no matter what the crap happens in their life, they would rather get a roommate in Lakewood Ranch. They're not going back to the hood. So you're talking to people that in their 20s are not willing to move into these neighborhoods. They might have lived there in the past, but they're telling me that it's not going to happen. They would rather get a roommate situation going on. They would rather work another job, work extra hours. A lot of them already have roommates, is how they're doing it, but they're not going to end up living in bad areas. And that's people that are, in their 20s working kind of very underpaid jobs. So if your McDonald's employee isn't willing to do it, what does that say for the rest of us in society? For the most part, most people aren't going to be taking these options. And then you have to remember that these landlords, slumlords, if they are going to rent to Americans, they're going to consider making improvements to the property, going in, gutting the place, putting in nice tile, maybe putting a washer or dryer, and then the rents that they're going to want for those properties in the hood are going to be almost on par with the rents in the suburbs, with the only incentives just being location, that you have no commute to the city. So that's like the other thing that is already taking place. If you watch my video at the beginning, you'll see that they're already going in and remodeling some of these areas. You're seeing landlords going in now and remodeling these apartments, making them more modern, appliances newer, and then they'll try to rent them for a little bit less than those apartments that have the amenities but don't have the location. And sadly for the people with commercial vacancies, their situation's not going to be good. They're going to be vacant for a while. And that's the real situation right now in the state of Florida. Yes, there's a lot of vacancy, both commercial and residential, but how that trickles down to an actual effect positively for the locals is to be determined in the long run. And we know for a fact that many of these duplexes and rental properties, if they become vacant, it's a great time for the owners to go in there, remodel them, make them look a little bit nicer, and then be able to rent them for a little bit more in the future. So I do believe, and it's already happening, that many of these decrepit properties that are sitting empty, the landlords are going to go back in there, paint them a little, put some landscaping in, put some newer appliances, and perhaps try to squeeze a few $100s more monthly out of them. But with homelessness visible at any corner in these cities, and crime being rampantly out of control, and commercial businesses being vacant, becoming open homeless camps, it's difficult to convince people to move to these types of neighborhoods. Nonetheless, I think the landlords are going to try to do the best they can to renovate these properties and try to squeeze a few more dollars out of them than what they're getting currently. The real challenge will be convincing people to move into these crime and gang and homeless infected neighborhoods when things seem to go from bad to worse in them. And of course, the economical situation is that people are starting to pick up scrap metal as well. So people here are actually living in campers and buses right now. This is a huge thing in our area. All this would indicate that for some things may look difficult, but these new leasing and new renting options that are coming up into the area don't exactly equate into a benefit for everybody. In fact, they probably equate to a lot of money loss for a lot of people. It seems like the negative outweighs the positive, and there's more money being lost right now than being gained. It's hard to convince me in particular that with a constraint of the total volume of money moving, that there's going to be any real economical benefit to the people that have to go out there every single day and get it. Yes, there's openings. What's going to happen to those properties? A lot of them are being boarded up as well, especially in places like Sarasota. But in places like Bradenton, we know what the real threat is. Of course, squatters and homeless people moving in. And just like they're moving into commercial properties, eventually these residential properties are going to become homeless camps as well. Just finishing to put the nail in the coffin for a dying community. Particularly in Sarasota, what I notice is that they're cutting the metal bars off the windows and putting up plywood on properties. In other words, they're planning for a long-term shutdown. One thing I noticed, you can see all over the hood in Sarasota, is that they're grabbing the houses, they're taking down the fences, they're taking down all of the attachments, they're just leaving the structure, boarding up the windows, shutting up the houses. And this would indicate that for the most part, these landlords understand that there isn't going to be a tenant for these properties and that they're not going to try to rent the properties. You're seeing what's happening right here, which is where they're just shutting up the houses like if a hurricane was coming, with the notion that these properties are going to be vacant for a while. There aren't going to be tenants. So they're not going to rent them for cheap. They're not going to lower the prices. They're not going to fix them. They're going to board them up, and they're just going to be sitting there waiting for better economic times. So that's another option that many landlords are going for, understanding the notion that even if they wanted to repair these properties, it's pointless. There's no tenant. So for many tenants, the most productive thing that they believe they can do is just board up the houses and hope for better economic times. There's also even like these right here. These are single family homes, brand new, and they got for rent signs going in. So if the new houses aren't renting, what logic is there to fix up an old house to try to rent it for some? So we're definitely starting to see just people boarding up properties as well. So that's like another thing that's happening, which is just taking the properties off the market. You know, like they don't exist. Like the structure's there, but the opening isn't going to exist. It's going to be boarded up, waiting for a better time. That's what I see going on here. It's been shocking driving around these neighborhoods and seeing the amount of for rent signs that are popping up, the amount of vacancies, and the measures that some landlords are going through to ensure that their investments don't go to crap. For some, the most obvious thing is just to board it up and hope for better times, knowing very well that if they don't board up these properties, they're going to be homeless camps in no time.